Live.
All right. Wow. Is my voice outside? That's amazing. Hello, my friends. This is Stefi Cohen. I'm here with a hybrid crew. Who's here?
You got me, Hayden Bow.
Ian Kaplan.
The one and only Alex Uslar.
And Ian the Rhino.
I hated that. I honestly hated
Wasn't
that.
my favorite.
The crowd's going crazy here, guys. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for coming here tonight.
No one's even looking at us.
No, nobody is.
Well, where are we?
Hey, thank you. We have a fan.
Tell us where we are.
Okay, so we are here at Wodapalooza Fitness Festival. This is actually our first time doing a live podcast, and we're really excited to be here. I've been living here in Miami for about 10 years, and I've come to every single Wodapalooza that has ever palooza'd around here. Every single one of them.
What year, Ian? Do you know what year this is? Like the 6th or 7th?
Ninth.
Ninth.
What?
Yeah.
Ninth year.
First one was in 2011.
I've come
Yes.
for the last 6 or 7 years. I
Yes, I'm 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And
Ian, how do you feel being here, not having to compete?
It's pretty relaxing, I have to say.
yeah,
I think this is a pretty cool one for us because we've come every year, but it's the first time that we're actually participating and that we have our own booth.
Yes.
Are you competing this weekend, Hayden?
Yeah, right.
You said participate.
Hey, actually, I was thinking that for next year we should have a team in the
And just come dead last
in the scale
everything.
division.
Yeah, in the scale division.
Oh,
and
it'd be so fun.
just not finish any workout, but still, we would have a blast, don't you guys think?
No,
have to-
I do not think so at all.
Do you
I
have
mean,
to
you
submit
wouldn't because-
videos to qualify?
Not for
Barely,
scale.
barely,
Not for,
yeah.
For scale, do you even
Let's
have to
just-
qualify or is it just
You don't have, you
registration?
open sign up, but like you just have to do something.
We should
Yeah.
we should just lie about our numbers and then come in here and just tank everything.
Even the scale division, even if we tried our hardest, with the exception of you, Ian,
Yeah.
and Ian, we would definitely still get smoked.
You'd be okay.
I'm,
I said Ian and Ian. These guys would be all right.
I think I could still wreck it pretty well.
Wreck-It Ralph.
yeah.
Wreck-It
Wait, why
Rhino.
would Ian do well and not me? I did
That's true.
CrossFit too.
You would-
I don't think a lot of people know that about you. You trained CrossFit pretty well. I remember, what was it, Swamp Monster, 2013, 2014. You were like 115 pounds or something then. You've been only lifting for a little while, and we went from our old gym, a bunch of people competing, and you were doing RX, right?
Yes.
Against some
Was that
big
with Allison?
girls.
Huh?
Did you do that with Allison?
No, with the Soul Crew, with
Yeah,
Meg.
A bunch of the
other
girls
people.
all competed, and you came in pretty high up there. I remember one of the events was like 135 front rack walking lunges.
I was dying.
But I remember watching you do it compared to like the other big girls, like 115 pounds. But damn, I can't even front rack lunge that. I don't think I still can.
I didn't even know you back then, but I saw pictures and wow, what a difference, eh?
But you were still jacked because you
She
had
was,
been,
but
you had been
she-
training for a little while then.
Yes.
You were doing like weightlifting pretty seriously and shit. Not like when I first met you.
Yeah,
You still
yeah.
had the baby fat in your face though. You
yeah.
had the chubby cheeks. You were super tan.
Yeah, really tight.
What was up
Wait.
with that?
Thank you. I mean, anything else you'd like to bring up?
How strong were you back then, Steph?
Not strong.
You were probably snatching about 60, like 135 or so. Not yet.
No, I think 115.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was snatching around 115.
True, because you weren't focusing fully on weightlifting yet.
No.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But you could front rack lunge 135. I remember that.
Have you ever done a
pretty hard.
multi-day CrossFit competition?
that
that
no.
was 2 days.
No, that was 1 day.
You sure?
No, but that might have been the only time I did that.
Yeah.
That's honestly-
It's a whole nother animal
Of course,
competing
yeah.
on Sunday.
Of course.
After doing it for 4 days.
I don't understand how these people do it. It's unbelievable.
There's so many
It's
reps.
unbelievable. Too many reps.
You know how
You-
else
you
are
know-
participating? We have a team here.
We
Yeah.
do.
Yeah,
Huh?
Team Hybrid.
Tell us about
Kaplan,
them.
tell us about that team, huh?
Team Hybrid.
Hand selected by Ian Kaplan
Yeah,
himself.
a bunch of young guns, former teen games athletes.
They're like 12 years old or something. aren't they?
They're all 19 or 20.
It's crazy. they're pretty
One,
damn fit, too.
yeah, one's birthday is actually today.
Wow, happy birthday to you.
Morgan Gray. Happy
Gray.
birthday, shout out.
Yes.
They all qualify in the elite division, a good position, and they are holding it down against the best teams in the world, against the Mayhem teams, against Games podium teams, and against a bunch of kind of long-term professional CrossFitters.
Where were they sitting at the end of yesterday, Friday?
I think they're around 25th place, and they just performed pretty well in the last event.
Sick.
So we'll see where that shakes out. That's kind of middle of the pack. Yeah, and then hopefully they can in this kind of last day move up into that kind of top heat and kind of get an opportunity to compete for a kind of top 20 finish.
What's the next workout?
Tonight is a brutal one. It's
Tonight being Saturday, we're on day 3 of
Saturday
Wodapalooza
night's
so far.
workout involves three teammates holding a worm, which is meant for 4 people, while one person completes a certain amount of work, and it's like 100 chest to bar. Forgot the other movement, 50 clean and jerks. I mean, we could pull it up. 25 snatches, and the weights are like 155 and 115. So the guys are moving moderate weight, but a bunch of reps, and the women are moving what's moderate weight for them. But the hard part is the non-working teammates are holding the worm, and the worm has to be off the ground while the working teammate accumulates work.
So you have one person going and getting a really, really bad low back bump.
Yeah.
And then they're going back under the worm,
Yeah.
and they're going to hold the worm and get even worse low back bump.
Yeah.
So it's going to provide a challenge in a way that that you never essentially get a break, and that's why aerobic capacity is so important in the sport of CrossFit.
What else is important in the sport of CrossFit?
Everything. Being strong, being conditioned, more importantly than anything, being conditioned in a way that your work capacity exceeds the amount of work you have to do that weekend over the course of those 4 days. So looking back at my own games training, all of our training essentially was much more difficult than the actual competitions, with the goal being that you had 0 fall off over the course of the 3 to 4 days. So typically everybody's good on day 1. You do 2 events, that's pretty normal training day, but then you show up the next day and you're a little bit more fatigued than the day before. You're maybe at 90%. And the next day, maybe you're at 85%. And then the final day, maybe you're at like 83 to 80%. Now the goal with training was to make it to where you're obviously strong, you're obviously conditioned, but you wanted to have as little fall off throughout the 3 to 4 days as possible.
How does your training leading up to an event like that change?
A lot.
Yeah.
It increases drastically. So if you were to go on your phone and you were to look at a typical Wodapalooza event that maybe lasts, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we would do that, and then we would be done, and then we would rest maybe 10 minutes, and then we would do it again. And then we would rest maybe 10 more minutes, and then we would do it again. And after we're literally doing sets of entire workouts. Like you would go in the gym and you would do a set of 10 squats, and then you might do it for 3 to 4 sets. We would do 3 to 4 sets of the event.
Yeah, you turn it into you want to think of CrossFit as an endurance sport with strength movements.
Yep.
So you train race pace, right? So you think of what the pace is that you need to win. You build that pace in the off season, and then you practice game paces leading up to the competition at a volume that exceeds competition volume.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's so interesting that it's the complete opposite of what we do in powerlifting. Like, we start with a wide base, and the closer we get to competition, we eliminate more and more and more things until you're actually, in terms of work capacity, you're pretty deconditioned.
Yeah.
Just optimizing being able to move something once.
Yeah.
It's literally the exact
To
opposite.
the point where a flight of stairs makes you go out of breath.
And I think that's
It's so brutal.
That's the big difference, because it's like the deconditioning of kind of that above threshold, like super maximal power, extended effort pace. So like really hard kind of efforts that are unsustainable. So you think like 2-minute max effort paces, or like the kick at the final end of a 20-minute kind of event goes away very quickly, and it needs to be maintained. And it needs to be trained and tapped into, like, right up to the competition. And also, if people are too fresh, then they go way too hard the first day, right? And now they're tanked the rest of the weekend.
It's we saw Colleen Foster doing that.
Yeah.
I was like, she's competing like tomorrow. What are you doing the whole workout and doing all this cardio and stuff?
Yeah,
and
we call that
interesting that what you were saying.
Yeah, we call that dampening. Like, and she's a good example of someone who's really strong. She doesn't need to be her strongest at the event. She needs to be able to handle the work.
Yes.
So
if you actually think about it, though, in terms of intensity, you can manipulate intensity through a variety of variables. You can manipulate intensity through frequency, through load, through volume, through rest intervals, through heart rate. You can manipulate it in all these variety of methods. So if you look at it in terms of intensity, you take a power lifter who is decreasing volume, but the load is going through the roof. The intensity is actually increasing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe your conditioning is going down, maybe your aerobic capacity is going down. The intensity through load is drastically increasing with periodized deloads and then a short taper at the end.
Yeah.
A CrossFitter is increasing intensity through conditioning, through volume, through work capacity, and maybe they aren't necessarily doing a heavy load that's going to take them out of commission for a few days. They're adding more work, more conditioning.
Right.
And then they do a short, maybe 3 to 4 day break, just enough time to where their body feels good, and then they jump right back into competition. We used to actually, my deload, I would train hard. Say the competition was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I would train hard through Monday, take Tuesday, Wednesday off, and then the day before the competition, I'm rowing an easy 5K just to reopen my lungs and re-feel how activity feels. Not hard enough to where I'm tiring myself or depleting my energy, but enough so to where I'm like loose and warm and ready to go the next day.
Hey, remember that day you rode a 10K and then came to the gym and deadlifted like
A PR.
700?
Yeah,
It was close.
Yeah.
310 kilos?
it was 310. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also something that's different is that you're only really, so if you look at the demands of the sport, there might be one max effort lift and it's never tested at the beginning of the weekend. So the way you move towards sport specific training is to actually then start to challenge yourself in kind of these maximal strength efforts under fatigue. So you need to put, snatches in that are heavy when you're tired or after a few sessions or deep into a few days of a training block, because it's totally different to go out on the floor and try to make a heavy lift after a 5-minute brutal event and then you're on a short clock to hit the next thing.
Absolutely. I did the CrossFit Total. Remember, were you there with Marcus?
Yeah.
You set a world record.
No, I mean, but
Unofficially.
look, here's the thing. I'm a powerlifter, and my whole thing is lifting heavy, and I think I came maybe, 5 points above the best score. It wasn't, or 10. It wasn't
Yeah.
that much.
It just goes back to what he's saying.
Yes,
It's like,
that's why I bring it up.
yeah, like doing all of those things one after another while you're still fatigued from the previous one. It's like, look at powerlifting competition where we'll literally do one squat attempt
And then wait
15,
20
20 minutes in
And
the next
for
squat
anyone
attempt.
who doesn't know what the CrossFit Total is,
Oh, yeah.
anyone who's here listening, probably you'll know. Probably the majority of our listeners won't know what a CrossFit Total is. But it's basically, I think you have 12 minutes that you can break up however you want to establish a 1 rep max back squat, 1 rep max strict press, and strict press?
Strict press,
Yes.
overhead press.
Overhead press and 1 rep max
Conventional
deadlift.
Yeah.
Yeah, and man, I tell you that under a time constraint, moving, like having to load your bar under a time constraint and having to do one movement after the other, it increases the difficulty exponentially of maxing out
So you're not actually getting a true max. You're probably getting like a 90%.
or less.
Ian, when they did the CrossFit Total at the games, they were able to warm up first though, right? And they
Yeah.
put like an attempt on the bar.
Yeah, they were at least able to warm up to maybe 60-70%.
That was also
like, in the
2007.
warm-up area. Well,
No.
Oh, they did
one recently.
the
You
first
old
time.
fart.
The first time they did it was 2007. The second time they did it was a couple of years ago when they moved through the floor. But I'm remembering the first time.
Yeah, so I feel like you could. It's just to your advantage to maybe even just only take one squat attempt in that.
Yeah.
Just like warm up for only squat, and then throw on whatever you think you can do one attempt.
Yeah,
and
for
move on.
sure. To be as warmed up as possible, and then you just go and take one attempt and
Because it's
squat and
like-
take the rest of the time to
But-
warm up your deadlift or whatever.
The level that these athletes are at that are testing this at the games, their heart rate probably isn't going above 120, 130 beats a minute. Testing those 1 rep maxes, their work capacity is so developed that they're barely even sweating, even lifting such heavy maximal loads. Whereas we, on the other hand, are pretty winded after that kind of effort because their maximal strength isn't that high, but their cardiovascular ability is that high. Our cardiovascular ability is much lower, but our maximal strength is much higher. So we're going to get a pretty significant rebound after we do the lift and trying to catch our breath. Now that day, whenever I rode the 10K and I came and then I deadlifted the 683, that was literally like 3 weeks before the 2017 games in Madison, the first year they had it in Madison. And I was pretty similarly developed at that point, where the 10K row, it was an interval row at that. So I was pulling hard. It wasn't just easy, steady state. So I was challenging strength and multiple energy systems. And after I got done with that, I obviously ate, drank water, replenished fluids, electrolytes, that sort of thing. I wasn't damaged in any way, shape, or form from that. I just basically increased blood flow and taxed my cardiovascular system, because my work capacity at that point was so high to the point that like my maximal strength, my CNS was still fresh. I was good to go. 3 hours later, it didn't even feel like I had done anything that morning.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, some people we see, I think there's a subset of athletes, and a lot of times it's women, that will PR their lifts all time in fatigue settings and ladders like that, where you increase the lift, the weight every minute on the minute, and you're doing like 20 attempts up to a max.
Yeah, but the main reason why that happens is because they don't consistently test their 1 rep max lift.
So it's not their,
it's not their true absolute 1 rep max. But
yeah, and also I think it's a confidence thing. They don't, right, because they don't test it, they feel better doing a lot of work underneath kind of top end, and they actually feel warm when they get to that weight.
Yeah.
And don't forget the power that the crowd has, and the power of adrenaline.
Yeah.
Because think back to your own experience in the animal cage. That's literally the experience that these athletes are having, PRing their lifts on the competition floor in front of 500 people, screaming their name.
Yeah.
The effect that adrenaline has on a situation like that, and how warm you are and how mobile your body and joints are to maybe get under a snatch or get under a clean or pull a maximal deadlift, like that's very, very, very powerful, and most of these athletes don't have that same stimulus in training.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
also,
let's briefly talk about, I want to take the conversation somewhere different. Let's briefly talk, for anyone who's listening here that doesn't know what we do, we are a hybrid performance method, and we specialize in creating strength training programs for athletes and the general population. Our main thing is introducing strength training so that it can benefit people in whatever sport they participate in. And so our whole thought process is that having a strength backbone in every single putting it in a periodized manner has the potential to benefit you in whatever sport that you do.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you, Ian, because you guys do CrossFit, in your opinion, how do you periodize strength in a way that doesn't take away from the other skills that you need to develop as a CrossFitter, and how important do you think strength training is for CrossFit?
you can go first.
All things being equal, the stronger athlete is always going to beat the weaker athlete, all things being equal. Because when you go out to compete in a CrossFit event, that designated load is a certain percentage of your 1 rep max, whatever the exercise is. So if you have an athlete, let's say, for example, the event that they have to do tonight, where they have a clean and jerk at 155 pounds. If you take an athlete with a clean and jerk max of 275 pounds, that 155 is going to kick his ass really fast. If you have an athlete, like, for example, when I was competing in CrossFit, my clean max was around 405 pounds. So when I went out there, I could have probably touch and go that 155 for 30 straight if I wanted to. Because for me, as a stronger athlete, the 155 is almost more aerobic work than anaerobic work. You have an athlete who's weaker, that 155 becomes like 60-70% of his max. That becomes a very highly anaerobic exercise. So it's going to fatigue him. It's going to spike his heart rate up really quick. He's going to have to take breaks because he's going to start redlining, getting above his lactate threshold. So the stronger athlete is always going to find the exercises to be easier. Now there starts to become some caveats there, because a lot of times the stronger athlete is going to become the heavier athlete. And then you come back to, the whole balance of CrossFit and, how heavy is too heavy, because that's going to take away from your gymnastic movements. That's going to take away from your calisthenic movements. So, me personally, training wise, I was already strong. I only needed to train strength once a week because I had a strength surplus for CrossFit. An athlete who is much weaker, who needs to prioritize strength because strength is literally a weakness for him, is going to prioritize strength more so than running. If he's running a 5-minute mile and he's only clean and jerking 275 pounds, deadlifting 385 or 400, he's going to probably benefit more from being on a strength bias program as opposed to like doing Hinshaw workouts, 4 times a week.
So that's a really cool kind of thing about your experience, that you were like really strong and you were a stronger CrossFitter. And I think there's some people like that strength level that's strong enough for CrossFit is very high, and most people get nowhere close to it. And when you work with people at a lower level, you just see them want to participate in the sport at the highest level, and you just come back to them and say you're not strong enough yet, right? And it's not just your squat, bench, and deadlift number. It's your weighted pull-ups. It's your horizontal rowing ability. It's your single leg strength for lunging, right? What the sport demands of people in terms of weight that needs to be moved for a very long period of time
at an elite level.
It's at elite level is very high, and then once you get to that level, there's plenty of people that start breaking those rules. Like the strongest person doesn't win for a lot of reasons, and then it becomes a very specific game. But there's so many people that see this sport and are so inspired that they want to just do what the best are doing, and they just don't have the background that the best do. The best we're weightlifting for 15 years. We're doing bodybuilding movements for 15 years.
Most of the best athletes have a pretty significant background in a sport that has a huge carryover to CrossFit. You have, ex-gymnasts who are going to excel at weightlifting and gymnastics. You have ex-weightlifters who already are coming into the sport with, a 265, 285 pound snatch, 355, 365 clean and jerk, 500 pound squat, and all they have to do is just learn how to run.
When we talk to people who really want to get to the next level, pretty much from every level up to the elite level, the answer is resistance training and extended aerobic work to build the base to handle more volume, right? Because it's kind of a volume game of strength training, so it's a little bit different. But that strength training needs to be there, and you need to accumulate the reps over time. There's no real substitute for it. And also, if you try to fast track it, like some people are talented enough to kind of finagle their way into fast times, into good qualifying positions.
But those are the extreme.
But also,
it's a rarity.
Yeah, they're and they blow up in the sport very fast. But they're also, I think, more vulnerable to burning out. To not being able to handle as much competition volume, to potentially not being prepared for the work that it actually takes to prepare for elite competition, which means they get aches and pains and can't sustain kind of the intensity of training at the level that's required to perform.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that having a specialty getting into CrossFit is a humongous advantage, especially if it's either in gymnastics or Olympic weightlifting or even powerlifting, if you have that kind of like strength reserve.
Right.
When I started getting into CrossFit, I had none. I mean, what I was doing was long distance running, which cool. I mean, I had
which
some,
helps.
yes, but at the same time, not having any of the other skills demanded so much time of me to have to dedicate to those things that it almost took away from the aerobic base that I had built in the past. Because I was spending so much time trying to get stronger, so much time trying to learn Olympic weightlifting, so much time trying to learn gymnastics and trying to learn how a WOD works, that I almost lost that aerobic capacity.
So like what you're saying, it's so different. If you want to be a competitive powerlifter, pretty much everyone can train the same. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced level lifter, you're going to be in the gym maybe 2 hours a day, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. But what I feel like 90% of people don't understand, if you're not competing at CrossFit at the high level, is how they train. Like you go sign up at your local CrossFit gym. Taking their classes is not going to get you to Wodapalooza or the games. When working at a CrossFit gym for 6 years, it's insane. Like I guarantee a lot of our listeners don't understand. Most of those people who compete at a high level, they essentially take that almost as their full-time job. You can have a full-time job and still be a very high-level powerlifter. To be a high-level CrossFitter and have a full-time job, it's so hard. Their sessions are literally 4 to 6 hours a day.
If not
they
more.
do a full Olympic lifting session, a full hour and a half, 90-minute Olympic lifting session, full volume on snatch, clean and jerk, pulls, all that stuff. A full strength session of squatting, accessories, etc. Rest a little bit, go work on skills, go do a WOD, go do another WOD.
There's so many skills.
You know what? I think that like doing the daily WOD at the CrossFit gym is a great starting place, because I think a lot of times we see it in powerlifting too. People get caught up in what the best people are doing, and they forget that that's not what got them to where they are. You know what I mean? You were just talking about it before, and we've talked to a lot of high-level lifters who lift maybe 3 times a week, have very simplistic programs, but in the beginning of their training, they did all sorts of stuff, and they developed all the different kinds of skills.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you have the archetype here at the high level, the female former gymnast who just loved training, who wasn't the best gymnast, who just loved to do push-ups, after the session. And you have the male former college football player who also wasn't the best, on the field or had the best skills, but just loved the weight room. Right?
Here's what you also have to remember about those classes that you take, right? Remember, those people are designated an hour, right? And a lot of them only go 4 times a week. In that hour, they have to do a full warm-up, because that's one of the CrossFit structured things, taking you through range of motion warm-up and getting your heart elevated, which is like 10, 15 minutes.
The class,
They do a cool down, which is like 10, 15 minutes. You're only actually working out like 30 minutes. It's really hard to progress. I actually saw a regression in overall strength, body composition, muscle growth, because I was just starting out. I was doing bodybuilding, going to a gym for 2 hours, 2.5 hours a day, hitting all the different muscle groups, and then just taking a group class like that where it's hard to be really well-rounded like that. It's
But
hard
you
to
know
actually
what?
focus on strength. It's hard to focus on conditioning.
It's so deceiving because you're working so hard for those 15, 20, or 30 minutes that it's deceiving. Like you feel like you did such a huge amount of work in 20 or 30
You got
minutes.
into a fight for 20 to 30 minutes.
Yes.
With the weights.
But I mean, comparing it with what you were doing before, if you were spending 2 hours at the gym doing strength and bodybuilding, obviously the amount of work that you accumulated over those 2 hours is going to be way larger than.
You're just not out of breath, so it doesn't feel that way.
You're just out of breath, exactly. So I can see how that could be deceiving for some people that have a certain expectation from joining a CrossFit gym and starting to do CrossFit and not getting those results, but you got to do your extra credit.
Exactly. Those are the people who always excelled, like when we worked at our CrossFit gyms, right? Those people who they
Like
come
you,
before
who's doing the
class.
weightlifting class, the
Exactly.
powerlifting class,
100%.
the
They stay
gymnastics
late,
class.
do accessories, work on their skills, do all that
Guys,
stuff.
I was staying so late. Alex used to be a manager at the gym I used to train at, and we would get almost into fist fights because he wanted to
Turn off
kick
the
me out
lights
of the
on
gym.
you.
Turn off the lights. I have a barbell over my head. I'm like,
Literally.
Yeah, to be fair, though, he would give you so many warnings, because you still did this even when we first started dating.
I remember.
going in there and being like, Steph, the gym's closing in 5 minutes. She's like starting her last exercise.
bro.
Like, you can't do that. And then
what side are you on?
He would literally
He's
turn
being
it off.
honest, Steph. It's okay.
But-
it's all right.
But yeah, he would literally turn it off while you'd be doing like a
Okay,
big
in
squat.
my defense, Alex, I was trying to get better. Okay, I needed
I was
your
trying to go
support.
home and
I
chill,
know, that's
dude.
what I'm saying. You wanted to take a poop or something.
Yeah, while everybody sleeps, you start working. You get working. But I think it also comes down to being honest about what you want to achieve with your program, because if you want to be here and compete over 8 events over 4 days, you need to train twice a day. Right? You compete twice a day.
Yeah, obviously.
But if you don't need to do that, you don't need to do that. Right? You can go to an hour class and get a little fitter, a little healthier, get a little stronger over time. And if that doesn't fit into your life, you can train on your own.
Yeah.
Right?
It's raining out here in Wadapalooza.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone's running everywhere.
We're losing our audience.
Yeah.
Or non-existent.
Yeah, there wasn't really anyone listening
Hey,
to this here.
I like to think that everyone is our audience, not nobody.
Let's move this table a little bit so we're not getting sick. Oh, there we go.
Nice.
Now we're talking.
So okay, Ian, you write the what was this? Ian, you write the hybrid WOD program of high performance method. How do you incorporate strength training into the program? Is it by seasons? Do you have like blocks of the training program in which you incorporate more squat, bench, deadlift, and snatch, clean, and jerk? Or tell me how the workouts are structured.
I do write it. Okay, so The very interesting thing and the difficult thing at the same time about writing a CrossFit program that a large amount of people are following is that it doesn't necessarily afford you the ability to periodize per se. So I write that program. It's a little bit different than the typical, like we just talked about, the typical CrossFit program where you have the hour-long class, you have a warm-up, you do 3 sets of 5 on a squat, and then you do a typical CrossFit workout. I write this program in a way that if someone wanted to train for a high-end competition, that if they followed it to the T, it would prepare them for a high-level competition. It's highly strength and conditioning based because top level athletes aren't actually doing a lot of CrossFit every day to get better at CrossFit.
What do you mean by that? Not doing CrossFit to get better at CrossFit?
So at a high level, if you look at CrossFit, if you look at the movement, if you break down the total amount of movements you have to do for the sport, you only get to like maybe 20 movements that are tested, maybe 25 movements that are tested.
Yeah, you get like 95% of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes then, we've been doing this sport for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The amount of reps you've done on each movement has accumulated quite a bit.
Yeah.
So you're starting to become, yes, you're preparing for the unknown and the unknowable, and you're trying to do that with this, group of exercises. But it starts to get to the point where in order to get an edge on your competition who has done the exact same amount of reps on all those exercises as well, you have to start to specify in a sport that preaches non-specificity. So you have to start taking a total bar, for example, and saying, how can I get better at this? Well, I can either weigh lighter or I can get stronger. And so most people can't necessarily just drop 10 pounds. So how do you get better at a toes to bar? Well, you start doing them strict. But once strict becomes easy, how do you get better at it? Well, you add ankle weights and then you do them strict. And so then you come back to a competition and you say, okay, I just have to do 50 normal ones. I can do them 50 in a row because they don't tire me out and they're very easy. So you almost overload these movements and training individually in sets and reps. And then when you want to condition, you use the most effective means conditioning, say rowing, sled pushing, assault biking, running, the things that are going to jack your heart rate up that are also individually tested in CrossFit, and you develop your aerobic capacity that way. Because by this time, you've done every movement so many times that you know how to do a dumbbell snatch. Mm-hmm. You can walk over it and you know how to do it. You know how it's going to feel. So the goal then, once you kind of get over that hump of learning these movements and being aware of what they are and how they feel, then it becomes a matter of improving your human machine in a way that you are fully developing your aerobic capacity through, interval work or volume on a true form or what have you. You're fully developing your strength through focused strength training sessions, perhaps even a powerlifting strength training block. You're fully developing your gymnastic ability to, take advantage of those movements, not under fatigue, so you can practice perfect technique so that your perfect technique is there when you go to compete in an event.
Go
ahead.
You know what's interesting to me is that there are several programs specifically designed for CrossFitters for the purpose of improving your aerobic conditioning. So you mentioned Henshaw?
Yes.
Okay.
A lot of businesses have like an engine program or
an engine program.
Yeah.
Then you have some people started doing Invictus weightlifting, right?
Yeah, there's a strength bias program typically. Like these are
but no, it's specific for weightlifting.
Oh, so the specific weightlifting. Yeah, Catalyst is a big one.
Yeah. Why is it? Look, the only 2 CrossFitters that have stopped by my gym to learn how to get stronger, because we are a strength specific gym, and that this is what we do. We are strength. Mm-hmm. The only 2 people that have stopped by are Matt Fraser and Noah.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. Like, why is it that if you're saying that the strongest athlete always wins, how is it that not more of these higher level athletes are seeking for professional help developing their strength?
They're trying to be efficient with their strength.
Well, but you know what? You actually raised a really interesting point. And there was a weightlifting coach told me this years ago when I told him I was going to go to dryland training. We had dryland training for hockey where you'd go to these camps over summer or March break or whatever. and you'd go on the ice, and then the coaches would take you and you'd work out. And when I told him I was going to go do this, he's like, well, why are you going to them to teach you how to lift? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, I'm a strength coach. Do I try to teach you how to play hockey?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, no. And he's like, what are you doing? So it's like, I think you're very right, and I think a lot of high-level CrossFitters, they go to all these other coaches for a lot of different disciplines, and they also think of weightlifting as the main strength sport. So they're going to
it is the most thing. It is most often tested, but that's why.
But it's not. But that
doesn't matter.
But to me, weightlifting is not really a strength sport. It's a skill sport.
Yeah.
Powerlifting is a strength sport.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's also.
And they're not seeking out powerlifting coaches to the same level as they are weightlifting coaches.
and they might not ever really have to seek it to the same level as weightlifting coaches, just because, strength. Powerlifting is important, but almost every competition tests snatch clean and jerk.
It's not about what they're testing at the meet.
But
football doesn't test the squat.
But it is because they're not. For example, Matt was concerned that they would test sumo deadlift.
Yeah.
Like that's what he came right. So he wants that edge because he's that diligent about what could possibly come up.
And he's already good.
Yeah, and he's already good at the other
everything
movements.
else.
Yeah.
So in the mind of a CrossFit athlete that is that good, that is on that level, the way they're thinking about this is
if they start testing deadlift more, they would start thinking about how to get a bigger deadlift.
in terms of strength events at the games, right?
Though.
It is backwards.
It is backwards, but that's how they think. But that's how they think.
Yeah.
But in terms of strength events at the games, if they can snatch 300 and they can clean and jerk 365 and that lands them a 5th place finish in that event, the amount of other events that they don't need that in, it doesn't benefit them to put that much extra effort to clean and jerk 380 or to snatch 315 for those 3
But of
places.
course, when the difference is when you're already at a high level and you're already snatch, clean, and jerking, squatting, and deadlifting competitive weights, then that's fine. But how about for people that want to get there? Maybe like people who didn't make the cut for the games, or maybe people who.
That's a good point. There's a difference between the very top of the sport, like the tip of the spear, and everybody else.
Absolutely.
Everybody else is not strong enough, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
For Gen
So
Pop,
where are those people?
They're following
majority?
they're following the market. They're following
they're following hybrid
Yeah.
law.
Well, yeah.
For Gen Pop, I think it is an absolute mistake that most people do not seek out powerlifting style training. I think that's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of exposure.
Yeah, one of the early kind of criticisms of the CrossFit.com program was that you saw back squat 5x5 once every 6.5 weeks.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right, you deadlifted 3 times a year.
You also have to remember, though, for a lot of people, it's kind of boring. Like the gym that I worked at, we essentially, when I first started working there like 7 years ago, we were much more strength and conditioning biased, right? We would do, we followed 5-3-1, where every Monday we squatted, every Wednesday we strict pressed, every Friday we deadlifted. Tuesday, Thursdays were very heavily condition based, and on those Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the WODs kind of complemented the strength work for the day.
Like they were heavy WODs? Or how
Or
did
they
that
just
work?
like accessorize. So on the squat day, maybe you're doing things with lunges, assault bikes, stuff like that to kind of complement almost the muscle groups, almost turning your accessories into a circuit, kind of what we tell people to do in our programs that don't follow WOD. And our members got bored.
Yeah.
They just didn't like it because they liked looking at like things like this and the games, and they're like, I want to do 1,000 wall balls one day, and then come in and max out my squat the next day. It breaks the rules of actual training,
it
right?
attracts
And
a
that's what
certain type of
CrossFit
person.
does, and it's like it's kind of dumb to an extent, right? But this sport, it's crazy. But for like a lot of the regular people, it's like, man, you get better doing something more like that, but they just want to do the crazy thing,
Sure.
So it gets boring for them.
I think
Again, that you did.
They want to practice their handstand push-up when they can't strict press an empty barbell. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, and they'll do the scaled version or whatever, and they'll just pretend that they can do it rather than investing the time and the reps to actually improve their strength.
To build the strength.
But I mean, that's one thing that we try to do with our programs is to try to make those strength training programs more engaging and accessible to people than what they typically were exposed to in the past, like whether a spreadsheet that was like 5-3-1 and you had your weights plotted out for 12 weeks and you just followed the sheet of paper. Because people went totally the other way and wanted to be surprised when they walked in the gym or have that kind of this novelty effect every day, something different, and that attracted a certain type of person. That type of person also didn't want to, necessarily see the same thing, every week. And also, in the early days of CrossFit, they thought that wasn't important. They thought the best CrossFitters didn't periodize, whatever that meant. And there was this whole campaign against periodization, which was ridiculous. Like that. This was the early days of CrossFit.
That was a real thing.
Yeah, no, they're like the best don't periodize. They just do different things every day.
Constantly varied.
Yeah,
it was the whole
West
thing was
Side,
constantly
baby.
varied.
Yeah, no, and they're like, you don't need to do the same thing every week, because if it's totally constantly varied and you just make sure the program is balanced, like that's the level 1 curriculum, you will get balanced fitness. That you could just be your fittest all the time as long as you do intensity, right? And that doesn't work, and it doesn't work in the way the sport has presented itself and the way it's evolved. And now everyone follows a pretty structured program. But that sort of structured program is hard to do in a class unless you're really, focus on everybody getting kind of consistent exposure to the movement you're trying to get stronger. And culturally, there was a shift. And the shift kind of happened because that only works for so long.
Absolutely.
But you need more kind of thought put into your program, and also need to consider the long-term progression of your members.
Right. And also the stage that they're at. For people who have never exercised before, they can come into the gym and exercise at random.
And they'll get literally anything will make a beginner better, but at a certain point you need some progression. And so the population of CrossFitters has matured, and also the standards at any level of competition, like to compete here in the scale division, you need a good program, like just to do the movements.
Before you move on, going back to that point, absolutely, I agree that the general population can come into the gym and do whatever and continue making progress. However, there's a whole argument behind readiness, right? And injury risk management when it comes to performing movements that you're not necessarily prepared for. So I think that's one of the reasons why CrossFit in its beginning stages started taking so much heat, right? Because people were doing movements and exercises that just they weren't ready for.
Yeah, and I think
Let's talk about the incidence of injury in CrossFit versus powerlifting, and how having a strength surplus might benefit you in that regard.
Do you know the numbers there?
Well, the numbers are pretty good and they're pretty equivalent, but the methodology of how those numbers are given is hotly debated.
Oh yeah, weren't you guys arguing about this before?
It's hard to track injury incidence rate because you need to define injury, and I think the best way to define it is extended period of mistraining. But people train through an injury,
right? So do they have to self-select though?
Well, you have to ask them a series of questions that defines an injury.
Because it's funny that you say that the injury rates are similar, because you literally go and ask any high-level powerlifter how they feel, and they will tell you
all the injuries.
Everyone's injured, 100%.
This was
then
hilarious.
you look at these studies that say that the injury rates are 1 in
2 in every 1,000 participation hours, but that could, like, if you're participating a lot, that's a pretty high percentage.
But it goes back to what you're saying of how are you defining
100% of people are hurt.
Yeah, it's usually extended periods of missed training or drastically reduced training, and you have to define what the minimum threshold for missed or drastically reduced is. But you can define it differently as like something that affects your training to a minimal degree, and then that's a much larger number. It's like, I don't go as heavy right now because this is bugging me. Is that an injury?
Hey, let's talk about our approach to dealing with injuries and kind of what are some of the common misconceptions that most people have regarding injuries. For me, I'll let you go because I asked you a question.
All right.
I was just going to answer my own statement.
Your own question.
So I think when most people are injured to the point where they feel like they have to stop or modify training, what they look for is something to do to make it better. Right, they're used to doing something to make improvement in their sport or their fitness. Right, they want more. They think more is better. That one is good.
What's the exercise that's going to fix my
I need to modify my training to the minimum degree. I need to stay on my program. I need to compete. What else can I do to make myself heal faster?
I want to recover so hard.
This is where corrective exercises and quote unquote rehab exercises come in as the Hail Mary. The thing that's gonna help you heal faster and whatnot. Correct your imbalances, fix your technique and whatnot.
Yeah. So they're like, I need to do my 100 butterfly pull-ups today. What exercises should I do for my rotator cuff? Because my rotator cuff, I know, is damaged from my MRI that I got immediately after I started experiencing pain. So I need to protect it as much as possible so I don't damage it more. Right? That's kind of there's a bunch of threads to that narrative that we keep hearing, and we need to unpack that for people because that creates kind of these unhelpful beliefs that then lead them to more destructive behavior or lead them to make decisions that aren't in their best long-term interest that could be easily addressed very early on in a process. So say you're starting to experience some shoulder pain, because of all the volume of pushing and pulling movements in CrossFit, and you're pretty far out from a competition, that's an easily modifiable thing. You can say what movements bother, what movements don't. Is clearly kind of a temporary irritation. We can temporarily change kind of some of the structures of the movement in training. Maybe we can reduce the load of very specific movements like overhead press for a while, but keep training through it and see if it subsides, and generally it does. If it doesn't, then we need to think about more long-term modifications to training, maybe reduce the sport-specific volume, do other movements that you're not used to doing. Like there's almost no horizontal pulling in CrossFit, and that's usually well tolerated on shoulders. So now we're getting positive experiences with moving through the shoulder. We're still loading the shoulder, we're still training, and then we can slowly introduce, through good progression and kind of some creativity, movements that look more like the sport.
So a few important takeaways from what Ian just said, in case you didn't catch it, because I think it's one of the main takeaways of this portion of our conversation, is that, well, the first thing is obviously changing the way that you perceive pain.
Yeah.
And we say this all the time, pain is not necessarily related to tissue damage.
Yeah.
Tissue damage is not necessarily related to pain all of the time. So just changing your mindset and your approach whenever you feel hurt or whenever something is bugging you, and understanding that you don't necessarily need fixing. Like
right.
Ian said, it might just be something that came up from a workout that you did or some sort of irritation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something going on with the particular body part that's hurting you.
Yeah, I think you want to remind yourself that you're doing CrossFit or you're training hard. You're capable. You're way stronger than most people, and there just might be some stuff that's totally coincidental that might come up on an image, and that has really nothing to do with the type of discomfort that kind of comes up from training super hard and doing all this stuff that's super challenging on your body, and also the stuff that's unrelated that's super challenging. Like if you're just training is hard, stuff starts to ache, right? And then when training gets easier, it stops aching, right? So not everything is a disaster that needs to be addressed, and it's not everything is a product of some sort of irreversible damage, right? There's plenty of elite people who have like no labrums to speak of and have no pain, and they're competing at the highest levels of the sport. I mean, Colleen came in the gym the other day. She had a labral tear. She had surgery on her shoulder, and she's back competing at the highest level.
Same goes, we see it all the time in back pain, right? The majority of people between 20 and 30 years old have some sort of asymptomatic herniated or bulging disc herniation.
And I think we don't do a good enough job of telling people that the prognosis on that stuff is really good. Like when someone has radicular pain or pain down the leg from the back, about 60% of that, 60% of the time, it heals on its own or goes away on its own. If you see a really big, disastrous herniated disc on an MRI, most of those go away within 18 months, right? They're totally normal again, right? People think it's
a death sentence. People think when they were seeing an MRI.
You must be bedridden for the rest of your life because of that one injury you got. Because no one bothers to tell them that stuff heals, right? And that they should continue to move in a way that's tolerable for them. And because in training, and CrossFit is a good example of a sport that has a lot of movement options, we can just find another way to keep moving, right?
And that's the other thing. So symptom modification, finding some other movement that you can do that doesn't increase your pain. So that was the second thing that you said, right?
Yeah, and also there's even ways to do the movements in the sport a little bit differently, because the loads are light. It's just about kind of getting the work done. Maybe rounding your back a little bit more is actually more tolerable than the super extended back, right? Maybe doing your kipping pull-ups a little bit differently, allows you to get through them. It might be more efficient for you. There's a huge range of variability that people use in movement strategies. That's one of the interesting things about watching the sport. It's watching how people get work done is really cool, because there are unique ways with which they do it, and that's a function of their mastery of the sport.
You see that particularly in Olympic weightlifting, even more so than in powerlifting, because I think body proportions play such a big role in how an athlete is going to move around a bar, and they're all going to come up with their different strategies to move. And you never see someone pointing out, or rarely do you ever see a weightlifting coach pointing out specific differences in movement and claiming that there's a right and wrong way to do it. Whereas in powerlifting, you do, right? Like if someone's hip is one hair lower than the other one, you're like, oh, you need to fix your hip shift or you need to bring your whatever. But yeah, differences in movement.
Yeah.
I think that once you start understanding biomechanics and movement better, you start appreciating those differences and taking them for what they are. Hold on, and finally, so I'm just trying to wrap that part up. So understanding pain, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and utilizing it to guide your decision making as far as your training goes. Secondly, obviously removing the aggravating movement. If there's something that's bugging you, don't keep doing it and hoping that it will magically go away, because it won't. But this is temporary, like Ian said, so it's a temporary removal of the aggravating factor or aggravating movement. And then finally, finding movement modifications, finding things that you can still do to work around that injury and around what's bugging you, and not falling into the trap of deconditioning and catastrophizing and victimizing yourself for whatever injury you're going through. So
yeah, and then also the idea that it's a temporary modification, that means gradually reintroducing the offending activity, not
exposure.
just totally going back into it once you feel better.
Yeah.
And that's where some creative progression needs to come in.
Yes.
I think one of the great parts about CrossFit, when you are injured, there's so many things that you can work on and improve. That 99% of the time, say you have a shoulder injury, if you just sit there and ask yourself, well, damn, are my legs as strong as they could be? 99% of the time, the answer is no. And so that's a perfect opportunity for you to work on that weakness and improve that, because I guarantee you that's not going to hurt your performance in the future.
Yeah.
Or if you have a hip injury or a knee injury, chances are your gymnastics are not as good as they could be. So that's just another opportunity. So it all comes down to like finding the silver lining of your injury and being optimistic, and that you can probably improve something else by removing and not focusing on the movement that is causing you pain.
Also, to reiterate, there's no magical exercise. So stop looking on Google for knee rehab exercises and thinking that there's one magical one that you don't know about it that someone else knows about that is gonna.
But I need to strengthen my VMOs and roll my AT band at the same time.
You do not. You do not. Injuries are not a result of weakness. Injuries are not a result of instabilities. Injuries sometimes happen for no reason, and injuries sometimes don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So.
And so you can't always prevent all of them. That's part of sports.
Which is why we've changed the way that we talk about them. We used to talk about injury prevention, whereas now we talk about injury risk management, which is slightly different.
Which is part of kind of a comprehensive approach to developing as an athlete, right? It's not just another add-on kind of secondary feature. It's everything that goes into an athlete's preparation. So
how important do you think that rehab exercises are? So should people even be spending time doing their external rotations with their bands and their Spanish squats with a band and their hip abductions for their glute med? How much time should bird dogs, dead bugs, side planks? How much time should people realistically be doing that for? And is it really necessary? And is it really effective? Is it something that people should be spending their time doing? Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a time and place for that, but you'd want to decouple it from the narrative that you're doing it to fix movement or prevent an injury. You're doing it because they're well tolerated, because they're challenging, and because you get better, at certain movement abilities that are at, maybe not very directly, but will eventually translate to your sport. Yeah. So it's like maybe getting some additional volume on the shoulder helps strengthen the shoulder in general. It's like maybe that VMO squat just develops leg strength. Yeah. And that's low stress compared to the specific kind of sport training, and it's easily added on as more training volume. And again, you would probably not do that very close to a competition because you're trying to minimize the amount of non-specific work or non-peaking related work that you're doing, because the other work is so stressful, and you're not going to realize those adaptations anytime soon. So there's many different kind of continuums on what you want to think. You want to think beginner to advanced. You want to think off season to in season. You want to think, right, what are you capable of now if you're kind of limited by injury or versus not, right? If you're more limited, then you're selecting from a different pool of exercises than if you're less limited. Of course. Yeah. I think understanding really truly, if you're a high level athlete, if you're a personal trainer, if you're a coach, understanding injuries and how to manage them in your athletes or on yourself is an integral part of what you do, because it arguably might be the biggest limiting factor in someone's career is your ability to resist injury, your ability to recover from them, and your ability to remain injury free.
Yeah, and a big problem I think we see in the market is that trainers recognize that a lot of their clients are going through pain, and they then go to a continuing education certification that tells them this is the cause of their pain, and now they know something, and now they see themselves as the trainer who helps people with their pain by fixing their movement.
Hey, you guys, stop playing Sherlock Holmes of injuries.
Yeah.
All right, you just simply don't know, and that's okay.
Yeah. And also, it's important to recognize that you don't know the cause, but you can still help people instead of saying things to clients that are actually potentially harmful to their own perception of their bodies, right? It's hard to come up with the perfect thing that makes them better all of a sudden, but it's very easy to mess them up for a lifetime.
Yes.
And you would mess them up by telling them there's damage to a structure that
More
don't
importantly,
necessarily know is causing
Or
the
this
pain.
is bad for you. You can't do this. You got injured because you were dumb. And, like all that stuff.
More importantly, this approach creates dependency.
Yeah. You need me for your fix for your injury.
Yes, and this is something that I always talk to people about when they approach me about injuries is that, my formal education is physical therapy. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. However, that's not what I practice necessarily. I do take on personal training clients, but for a different purpose. So I'm not being a salesperson, right? I'm not trying to sell you on my services as a PT. Whereas I think something that you need to be very clear of is that anytime that you seek help from a physical therapist or a chiropractor, and I'm not throwing shade at anyone, the reality of the situation is that they're being salespeople. They are trying to get you to buy into their services. They're trying to get you to buy into their theories, their practice, and they're trying to get you in through the door. So keep that in mind. When someone, it's a red flag if you walk into a PT's office and they tell you that there's something wrong, something needs fixing, and you need X amount of treatments or
they're in a fee-for-service model, and they're incentivized to sell as many services as possible.
Yeah.
And they've been educated in a system that teaches them how to sell as many services as possible, rather than a fee-for-outcomes model.
Exactly.
So you want to, and there are people who do a good job of thinking about outcomes rather than services, but when we are kind of not dependent upon that income stream, we can make, I think, a more honest appraisal and also figure out what's the highest value of care for someone, and because it is very possible to overtreat and underdeliver.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, it's the rule, not the exception.
Yeah. What's sad is that a lot of the softwares for inputting client progress, at least on the PT side, the ones that I've used from bigger companies, they force you to have an outcome-based system.
Yeah.
So obviously, you're not gonna get paid by the insurance company if you're not proving that your client is making progress.
Yeah.
But this is the worst part.
You can finagle it.
Yes.
Yeah, you can make it up.
I saw that so much.
You're supposed to make it up, essentially,
People making up the progress, right? Not truly measuring range of motion, not truly measuring strength,
and
not
also,
truly measuring objective measures for the particular injury, and then just making up, basing it off on a special test.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, so first the crank test was positive, now it's negative progress, or whatever.
Yeah, and even
crazy.
you kind of pick and choose and selectively report which one looks better and which one doesn't.
It's back.
Yeah.
So anyway, in conclusion, if you go into a PT or chiro office and they tell you something's wrong, fix it, and then they tell you need X amount of treatments, and then they overly focus on manual therapy or things that you cannot do for yourself, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Go to someone that allows you to be more independent, that empowers you, and that doesn't try to build that dependency in the relationship.
Yeah, one quick thing. Yeah, don't confuse low cost for high value. Low cost can be low value, and also low cost can be high risk. Right? There's the risk to going to the wrong provider. Right.
Absolutely.
So find a good one who's willing to work with you and deliver high value care that is best practices in today's kind of healthcare landscape, which is tough, but hopefully we'll provide some recommendations.
Amen, brother. All right, so we're approaching the 1 hour mark. Let's go into our next segment of the podcast.
Florida man.
Yes.
I have a good one.
All right.
I can't wait to hear
you guys,
yours because then I'm gonna have a live one.
You guys, we're in-
witnessed firsthand.
We're in Florida. We're in the real South in here.
Actually, the Florida's not the real South.
What do you mean?
We're as south
not
as you
considered
can get
the South.
in
This
the
is
US.
North Cancun.
Yeah, now. South is like Alabama, Georgia.
Yeah.
Hey, this is the real South for me,
Missouri.
okay? It's all a matter of perspective.
It's as south as we get, right?
No, this is
Yeah.
crazy. Florida's a whole different planet.
Look.
Right? It's not.
Yeah, unless you're in Jacksonville or Tallahassee, it's not the South.
It's a different type of South.
What did you say the other day? The South is the
Is
new
the New
West.
West?
I like that.
No, the
Yeah.
South is the New West, yeah. Okay, anyway, so in this portion of our podcast, we bring up a recent Florida man story. For those of you who don't know what a Florida man story is things that happen in Florida on the daily that are the most bizarre of crimes that you could possibly hear about. So I got one. You got one?
I have a good one.
Alex, look for one too.
Oh no, I got one in my head.
You got one?
You saw one apparently.
I saw one here at Wodapalooza.
What?
Go ahead.
I want to hear that one.
All right, you want to hear that first? So Thursday was free to enter, right? Because it was a face-off, and me and Mike were hanging out of the booth. So since it's free to enter, that means that anyone off the street can just walk in. So there was a quite obviously homeless man, like right in front of our booth, asking people for change, and some people were actually giving him change, And he's like trying to come towards us, and we're like, dude, no. He turns around. He's wearing like old tattered blue jeans, and on the back of his blue jeans, it's covered in
Poop.
Covered, it's smeared some chunks on it as well. It's covered in poop.
Maybe
So
saw it
like
on
we
a
were like,
Hershey's bar.
thankfully he he walked away, and a little while later, they have a lot of police patrolling here in Wodapalooza. A lady officer came up to us and was like, "Can you hold my bag here behind your booth?" She's like, "I got to go escort someone out." And she went and got him and got rid of him. Wow. That
He
was the
probably
Florida
just
man.
sat on a sneaker.
Yeah, he
bar.
definitely. There was a snake. There was a sneakers bar on the on the sidewalk. He just took a seat on it.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't just pull his pants down. And well, that's funny. I don't know if we talked about this on here or not. Like our gym is near the hood,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of characters walking around there. And how many times have we seen someone literally pull their pants down and just poop in front of us? Right?
So many.
So then I asked
One time is too
police
many.
officer who's a member at our gym. I'm like, dude, what's up with that? And he said Miami-Dade County is one of the only counties that they can't arrest them for that because the homeless population is so high. They're allowed to just poop and pee on the side of the road if they're homeless. They don't
Nice.
get arrested for indecent exposure.
That is complete anarchy.
But then if I pull out my wee-wee and I go pee-pee,
You're gonna end up
you
on
get
a list.
arrested.
Yeah.
Or I'm on a list.
It's
you
the
know?
perks of being homeless, right there.
Yeah.
Wow. The
You just say
perks.
that you're homeless.
Yeah.
You cannot
Can you
say
pull
that
the
you're-
homeless card?
I don't think you can. I don't think they.
But then you pull out your ID and you have an address, so you have a home, right?
Okay, I got one for you. Shirtless Florida man had a toddler tucked between his legs on a motorcycle.
Holy crap, dude.
Clearwater police said the man
Dangerous.
sped away from them and ran a red light after they tried to pull him over. Yeah.
Hey, you
He was
can't-
driving a motorcycle with a toddler tucked between his legs.
I don't know how that
27
works.
years old.
Dude, it's illegal
Charges
to
of child
put a
neglect.
kid in just a regular car seat. They have to be in a special
Hey, man.
child seat. This guy's sticking kids down his pants on his motorcycle.
Hey man, what are you thinking when you do something like that?
Nah.
Oh, this is probably good.
Florida, baby.
Florida.
I got one more good one.
Okay.
So, Florida man in "No Seriously, I Have Drugs" t-shirt arrested for possession of drugs. So his shirt says, "Who needs drugs?" And then underneath it says, "No, seriously, I have drugs." Like he's like to sell drugs.
Advertising.
So
I mean, he's using clear advertisement, you know what I mean?
I guess
Yeah,
they had
clear
probable
message.
cause.
There's no doubt that
Clear, concise message.
So
Yeah.
I guess they had probable cause to search him because of his shirt, and then they actually found drugs on him, and he was arrested for it.
that's so silly.
It's
When
ridiculous.
keeping it real goes wrong.
And I think that's all the time we have, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think
Okay.
we're supposed to keep this one to an hour, so.
It's an hour and 2 minutes.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, Wodapalooza.
Sorry, Waza. But hey. Okay.
You know what
But
I would
hey,
say.
thank you so much for having us. Thank you to the audience, the huge audience that we had today. They brought
thousands
together
of people here.
Hundreds of thousands of people listening to this podcast. People were laughing. I got one. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you liked our podcast, feel free to head over to Hybrid Unlimited on Spotify, Apple, and pretty much every other channel. We are Hybrid Performance Method. We have a gym not too far from here, so if you're close to the area, feel free to stop by. It's
The doors might be locked.
yes. I mean, just tell
Hit us up on Instagram first.
Hit us up on Instagram. Again, I'm your co-host, Stefi Cohen.
Hayden Bow.
Ian Kaplan.
Co-host Alex Uslar.
Coco host, Ian the Rhino.
Thank you guys for listening. Catch you guys next time. Bye.
Cheers.